Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elευθeri, and I'm going to make a presentation which, as Dr. Vanitidis said, is slightly different from the title given in the program. Is Man in the Sea in Prehistoric Times in Crete. I don't know what you expect, to hear this afternoon, but this is what we are going to get. What's the matter? So, the thing is, straight away, whoop, we're changing. Oh, supposed to. Yeah. So I don't know how much you know about Crete, but Crete is a large island, and according to, if we believe Homer in one of his works, Crete was a city of 90 cities, an island of 90 cities where Knossos is and Minos is the king. No one believed, Homer, because there was absolutely no evidence, was there anything in Crete. Not saying 90 cities, there was not even one. So there was more or less, no one knew for thousands of years, it was completely forgotten until the famous archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans came, and he excavated, an area east of Knossos, east of Heraklion, and he found a huge complex, of palaces, hundreds of rooms, of courtyards, of cellars, of stores, and so on and so forth. Evans immediately understood that this was Knossos, and where Minos was the king, and there from his name, called the Minoan civilization, the people were called Minoans. The palace, was richly decorated. It was an absolutely splendid one. Now, this is a reconstruction, but it's quite a lot of this. If you go, there, I think, now is you're not allowed, to go in, because I think, there were so many thousands of people that the whole thing started, crumbling. So it was it was something which was not ordinary thing. It was something, I would say, extraordinary thing. It was richly decorated. It was looking, very rich, to and digging, more and more. He found that was an extremely rich city, which had a very powerful fleet, a commercial fleet, which went and had exchanges with all the cities and places around the Aegean, but even farther away, to the Middle East, and also to Egypt. So they had a commercial fleet, but also they had a navy. The commercial fleet really helped them to become very rich because they had, these commercial exchanges. But the navy protected them from all kinds of invasions from other countries, other places, and therefore Crete and the whole of the Aegean remain in peace and prosperity for 600 years, from 2,000 years BC to almost 1400, or something. 600 years, which is called Pax Minoica. It was extraordinary that, but as I said, it was there. They dominated the whole of the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, probably I should go back. The Minoans identify themselves 100% with the sea. They identify themselves because they harvested the sea and because Um, the sea was the means, the way that they could use their ships, their boats, to conduct, their commerce, and therefore, they are very grateful for that. But they respected the sea, but also they feared the sea. And they feared the sea for all kinds of different reasons. They feared the sea because uh, storms, and, because of the typhoons, because of the waves, and so on. But as I said, they feared the sea about something else. This something else was something was lurking underneath, underneath the waves. And these are monsters and evil spirits, and this is um, um, a monster attacking a Minoan sailor standing on the deck. They were uh, this all this fear led them to introduce um, a goddess. A goddess. I don't know if this goddess, of the goddess of the sea, but the goddess of the sea, we know even her name because of linear B writing. It was called Potnia, Potnia of the fishes. They introduced that goddess death because they needed protection, because they had to ensure they had a good harvest of the sea. But also they felt, their adoration, their worshipping deserved, more than that. They had processions and libations and all kinds, of expressions, of their faith. And you'll see, everything here, there are women. I should say this was a patriarchal, a matriarchal society in Crete, which was very much in advance, of um, modern day, feminism. They didn't need to have a feminist there. Now, they felt that their, as I said, their adoration, their worshipping, deserved, something more than just ordinary things. That processions, libations, is not expression, but beyond there, they felt, they had to decorate their palaces, their villas, with marine motifs. Everything who had to have to do with the sea. And everything had to do with the sea were the environment, but also all the creatures which existed in the sea. These are, you can see two dolphins, surrounded by other fish and so on. And I would like to stop here and say the following thing, that everything which appears in these paintings, these reproductions, are allow us, to identify them to species. This is Delphinus delphis, and all around there's all around the little fishes like the yellow and so on. These are wrasses, which most probably are Coris Iulis, and the red one here using poetic license, probably because probably could be red mullet. And all around there were sea urchins, Paracentrotus. And yet, this is not an ordinary painting. It's more than that, which shows I think, if you want, the devotion, of, the Cretans towards, the goddess. This is a narrative synthesis. Is trying to tell us, something like a story. And that is very, very new, actually, for the time then, and also for after, for a long period of time. And at the same time, it's introduced also not only the synthesis, which appears here, but also gives, some idea about the background, the perspective. So they went on, that painting all kinds of different things, marine species, marine animals. And here you have two pilgrims, actually. They are not fishermen, the people say they were fishermen, but they are pilgrims which walk towards an altar to the to the goddess, in order to make an offering. On the right-hand side is that young man carrying two bunches of fish, which I know what they are. Is the dolphin fish, Coryphena coryphenoides, and the other one is mackerel. So, and here you have another fresco which again is a synthesis, tells us, a whole thing is all this are painted in naturalistic way, impressionistic way, which means they paint, as why the artists, were very, very, very good, as they were in nature. It was 100%. And here we have this flying fish jumping over the waves, in in a limited environment, because it slightly, destroyed this, damaged. And there are rocks, on the left-hand side, and there are sponges, there are all kinds of things, floating about. But they didn't, they painted all that, but also they engraved things. They engraved things, on stones, on clay pots and so on. Here is a fisherman, with an octopus. An octopus, and something else which I have to check what it is. Now, more than that, this is, a crab, but not any crab. This is a crab which I'm going to know. I think it's Pachygrapsus or Polygrapsus marmoratus. We know that, from the carapace and also from the pincers, and all the limbs around, which has been engraved, on a clay pot. So everything, all creatures, sea creatures, they were as subjects, for their devotion, to by representing them, was an act of devotion to the goddess. And this is the star subject, a star animal, for the Minoans. You see an octopus shooting out from its lair in a very angry way, and all around, right down here. Can I use this? I don't know. Oh, this is a triton, and these are probably jellyfish, all kinds of different things, not identifiable. But it's quite interesting, in order to know and paint, this octopus, they must have observed its behavior. That's remarkable, for people to take time and bother about showing also the behavior of octopus. And more of that, octopus, as I said, it was a star subject, and more of that, always, not, by themselves. By themselves, was something, which they did not accept, seaweed and so on and so forth. And now we go, to the mollusks. And the mollusks, are tritons, Caronia tritonis. Again, with this, all kinds of seaweed, And this is not actually a starfish in the middle. You know, they're thinking it's something to do with the sun, although there was no worshipping of the sun, you know, in Crete and nowhere in Greece. But Caronia tritons were sacred animals. They were sacred animals because they were being used by blowing through to invoke, you know, the goddess. So it was very, very important animal organism to the Minoans. We can go on forever, actually, not because we have all the material here, but here more tritons, more seaweed, and here in the corner there is an argonaut. So this is a cup again, you know, it's a synthesis, as I said before, you know, which they try to make it, you know, true to life. And what's an argonaut? An argonaut is a little squid, you know, mostly, you know, having a mesopelagic, you know, existence. And during the period of reproduction, the female secretes a shell, climbs in, and deposits its eggs inside there until the eggs are hatched out and they are released. And this is how the Minoans represented the Argonaut. What happens after? I think, you know, as cephalopods, you know, have a lifespan approximately a year and a half, you know, all of them die. And this is very, very interesting, you know, from the metabolism point of view, physiological point of view, how they manage, you know, to grow so, so fast, so good, so big. Now, there's another thing here now, another set of animals which have to do with the Minoans. This is the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion has a huge collection of seashells of all kinds. This is again, you know, the goddess. You see, you know, has a special. This is probably the fashion, you know, very narrow waist, and the rest, you know, I'm not going to comment. Right? I don't know if the fashion, you know, continued or not. Actually, there are some more frescoes, you know, showing the same. So disappeared this kind of fashion. You know, I don't say if it's good or not. You know, the ladies have to tell me. Now, all around here, you know, this is, you know, how it appears, you know, in the museum. All around, you know, the goddess, which was found in a sacred part of the palace of Knossos, is surrounded by shells of different types, and some of the shells, you know, are painted. Now, here is a little diversion. You know, as I said, I have thousands of shells in the museum. I made a mistake probably in my life, and the archaeologist came to me and said, you know, from a cemetery where there are lots of graves, we have found quite a lot of offerings inside the graves, which are normally, you know, they are marine species shells. Sometimes there are bits of echinoderms, of crustaceans, and so on. And they said, would you like, you know, to do it? Now, before that, the same thing, you know, there were some archaeologists who came to me and they said, we have this problem with the museum, with the graves. Would you like to identify some? And there were some, not many. And I identified them. So they said, thank you. So the people from the museum said, hang on, we have also some cells that have a collection. Would you like, to identify some of them? I said, yes. All right. And I thought, oh, before I continue, this cemetery actually is below your feet, here. Where you stand is all this wing, and beyond there was the cemetery. So all the graves, if you see ghosts here, it will come from there. They're just below your feet. So these people in the museum said, oh, well, it's fine, you'll do it. I said, okay, all right. So they came with a big box of thousands, and the thousands, it was 6,438 or something like that. And I have to identify every single one, which was not fun, actually. But the important thing is now, quite a lot of them, they were nicely, but really nicely painted. Painted red, painted black, and painted green. The green fades away, very quickly. But all this, they were found in the temple repositories of the Palace of Knossos. Very, very important, obviously, in order to put them in very sacred places around, statuettes, which are very important to their religion. And Evans, made a collection of some of these things, put them together. Okay, at the front here, all the front here, they are the cells I showed you, which are painted. But right at the back, the statuettes and also some other objects, are made of faience. Faience is a very fine, clay. It's a very fine clay, and they made not only the statuettes, but also they made the reproductions of marine animals, artificial ones, like flying fish, like argonauts and so on, and quite a few other things. Now, don't ask me why. Obviously it was very, very important to them. It's a little bit, okay. And they made molds, to make these things. Because it meant something, very, very important. And this is, something which really amazed me. It amazed me, and this is Tona Gallia. And this is carved in stone. And see these striations, all these striations here, here, which are true to nature. If you say about naturalistic, kind of presentation, not only in paintings, but on the objects they were making. Why it's so interesting? Because they didn't have iron. They had only, copper and bronze. And this, you cannot really do that, do these striations, with tools of this kind. Anyway, I don't know. And now the sad thing starts. Don't have to cry. And the sad thing is, the volcano in Santorini. Volcano in Santorini, which exploded in about 1460 and scattered volcanic ash and pumice stone all around the islands here, certainly in the east coast, Crete, and then, also as far as Egypt and as far as the Middle East. What happened in Egypt, some of the stories they are saying about the the sun disappeared and so on is related to that. It was a huge explosion, destroyed completely the tsunami which followed, and the earthquakes destroyed completely the east coast, the north coast, of Crete, destroyed the coastal settlements, most palaces, and also destroyed completely, their fleet. At the same time, Crete, which was in such a very poor condition, it was not rich, it was not powerful anymore, was occupied, by a militaristic, kind of people from the center, of the Peloponnese, the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans had no sense or refinement, actually. They didn't. They were not concerned with things like that. These are facetious, and strange, strange cultures, occupied, Crete, Minoan Crete, for about 200 years, destroyed whatever was left of Minoan Crete, and themselves, were occupied. They were taken over, by another, the Dorians, which came from the north. The Mycenaeans, they took over, actually, the Minoan cities, and they looked, their art, and they started trying to copy what they saw, what existed. And this is really abstract way of presenting octopus, as you can see, and this is, a coffin, and it was immediately understood that they didn't understand themselves, what were painting and what was the painting, the Minoan paintings and representations, because there was no inspiration, because they didn't have the same religion, because they didn't know anything about, what happened before. So they started, making all kinds of different things, thinking, that they are very nice and very decorative. And this got out of hand, actually, because probably had never seen an octopus in their lives, and yet, even more, became, monstrous. It's a frightening thing, So I am afraid, that after that, and they they started doing linear things, lines, which were not terribly interesting, after all the synthesis, the Minoan art, provided. And it took about 1,000 years until the Hellenistic period, where it shows someone with a sea creature, and here is a fishmonger chopping up, a tiny fish, and they had plates with identified that you can identify these animals, but you can understand immediately this is not a synthesis, as the Minoans understood, as the Minoans, painted, and this is just things thrown on a plate. It took years and years again, many years, until the Romans, which produced some brilliant mosaics. And this mosaic comes from Pompeii, and every single of these creatures can be identified to the species, and I had to do that too. So I'm afraid that was the end of Minoan civilization, and we had to wait, for the dolphins of the past to come and tell us how important the Minoan civilization was at that time. Why I was interested in all that? I was interested because I wanted to find out to what extent what they were painting there, entirely not from a religious point of view, but from the point of view of an ecologist, because I should say I'm a zoologist. I'm a humble zoologist. I belong, to a tribe to which is going to be extinct quite soon, because zoology is not taught in universities. So anyone who does not zoology have great difficulty dealing with animal life, with sea life. So anyway, well done, so far. And I was very interested to find out whatever, was there in relation to what is here now. And we found the amazing thing, which is very interesting, that we did not really see any difference from the organism we find and the organism we found, any difference in the ecosystem and the biodiversity. Might be some species which disappeared, some species which appeared, but not really, that it was some kind of stability, I would say. Is it possible? Well, of course it's not possible, but it will have ups and downs. But at the end, there was no dramatic changes, as I said, in the ecosystem. There's not difference because all the big destructions, by earthquakes, by tsunamis, and so on, they were over. So there was a period of stability, to a certain extent. And therefore, I think, that Minoans, through their presentations, gave me something to think about, the biodiversity and the ecosystem of today. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Professor Eleftheriou, thank you so much for this presentation. I am really honored to have chaired your fantastic presentation and bringing us in a dream that was reality at the time. It is still unbelievable that was reality. So it's absolutely incredible. So I leave the floor to the audience for question, for consideration.
No archaeological questions,
No,
please.
not archaeological,
I'm not an
but then
archaeologist.
the view that you were giving of biodiversity at that time was being really impressive. And then, if I can tell, when I was at the Archaeological Museum here in Heraklion, I got an impression of biodiversity, and then looking at the pottery, looking at all the kind of realizations that are in the Archaeological Museum from the third millennium before Christ, that totally gave us the idea of a society, as you say, that was society meaning managing to have build a peaceful environment in the island and in this region was really fantastic, really great. So the floor is yours.
I don't think, that they were expecting that. Oh,
Yes.
So thank you very much for this fascinating talk. You seem to really have a down on Mycenaean art. Is that because it isn't pictorial but abstract? So I wonder if you were conflating a desire towards abstract-based art against a kind of dislike of engaging with biodiversity or engaging with the sea. Are they not two different topics?
The Mycenaeans, were not in contact with the sea. They were, at the middle of the Peloponnese. Well, the sea is not very far, of course, but the most probably they have known it was, to sail to Troy, to start, the Trojan War. Now, they did not, yes, could be abstract, of course, but I don't think, they were sophisticated, to create something like that. Because they did other things, beautifully, and things which have nothing to do with the sea. There were scenes, from land, they had very nice jewelry, and all kinds of different things, but nothing with the sea. So did they select to be abstract, with something they were not in contact with? Probably. You can call it, an abstract, art. It didn't last very long anyway. And it's one of the main things, of course, is they have never seen, well, I believe, they have never seen an octopus. If you don't see anything, what happens actually, in Minoan art, in Minoan times too, is some people copy other people. But little by little, if you do that, you start introducing all kinds of details, or you make mistakes. Therefore, the result is not really, what should be. And this happened, as I said, in Minoan times too. Some people copied other people because they didn't have access, to whatever, the sea life existed, which sea life, and I should say, they respected the Minoans, the dimension, the color, everything, as they were. And all these creatures must have been painted, seen in very fresh state. Because otherwise, you won't know, what they looked like. So, yes, it could be an abstract way. Well, I do not, say no. But their whatever they produced, as far as the sea is concerned, is very, very limited, very small. The same thing applies to the classical period of Greece. But again, they produced practically nothing about the sea. They produced all kinds of wonderful things, but not really, what. Now, I don't know if I answer your question.
No, you did. It's very, very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Eleftheriou. It's never too late to ask questions, although we have been around in this place for years. Well, today, it's very formalized, the study of archaeobotany, and mainly the teams of archaeologists in their group have zoologists, botanists, etc. So it's very formalized, and I think it went after a period where each community was very closed. Archaeologists are not easy, and they have their rules and their structure, and I think that they were not very open, at least back then. So you were one of the pioneers, the first probably biologist they have ever contacted in Greece. How was this interaction? Can you tell us a little bit on that? Thank you.
Sorry, the interaction?
The interaction with the archaeologists, they came to you and they were very happy, they were dubious.
They were not very happy. They were not very happy because they had they thought certain things and they were not prepared, to accept certain things. And for example, they were saying this is that, and we were saying no, it is not. And they were saying, why do you say that? Because of several reasons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, what about the other one? Now, it becomes tiresome to a certain extent because they know and you don't. But you do certain things, they don't. And it's very difficult for them to accept, you do. No. And it's not a question of mistakes, it's a question of interpretation, certain things. And the further problem was, with taxonomists, that they kept saying, oh no, this is not that species, that is the other, and this is the other, and so on. A little bit like geologists about mollusks, every so often, they change their names, and okay, you can change their names, and find out, but I must accept that a certain amount, as I said, is guesswork. It's guesswork. We know what we know, the things, we can identify, and the rest, we make a guess. We make a guess, which, okay, is nothing will not accept, actually, any kind of archaeological, theories and so on. But they were receptive from one point of view, because it has been written quite a lot about the marine organisms and about different issues. And this is a pity, I didn't have to show you that, as I said, the Minoans identified themselves with the sea. They feared the sea. So they had amulets, the sailors, which they kept on themselves to make sure, are going to survive the perils of the sea. And all kinds of different things, For example, in this, in Evans, display, there's a big cross of marble. What does it mean? No one knows. And there were all kinds of different things about the palace, about, no, as I said, I'm not an archaeologist, but I could give you probably a better description than some of the guides, I hope there's not a guide here. Guides, showing you and tell you about the Minoan civilization. Not necessarily about the goddess, marine science and so marine creatures and so on and their religion, but there's a whole range of other things. There's plants, there are animals. As I said, it was their conception. It was physiographic. Their themes were from nature. And nature was around them, around themselves, and therefore they revered, nature. And they painted with great, enthusiasm. As I said, lots of other things, that I cannot really, mention here. And they had absolutely some splendid things, to show. Golden cups, where all around shows people restraining a bull, because obviously bulls existed here, as other animals existed, in the whole, of Greece. Because, 6 million years and then 4 million years, before 4 million years, Crete did not exist. It was just a continent. Therefore, all the animals from Africa, like lions, for example, you'll find the lions appearing everywhere. They have never seen lions, if they have, sorry, in order, to paint, not to paint them, to engrave them, or to paint them, you must have seen it. So there were bulls too, here, and absolutely splendid, jewelry of all kinds, and artifacts, the Mycenaeans too, and the ancient, the classical period in Athens and so on. But the sea really was venerated here in Crete. It was absolutely, 100%. There was a civilization which disappeared, never to be found again. And it was ignored for thousands of years, just, and who knows how many other civilizations exist, and no one knows anything about it. Okay. Oh.
Professor Tassos Eleftheriou,
oh.
Thank you so much for this inspired talk and presentation. I would like to stay for a couple of minutes in the disciplines this talk has to the audience, because for those who are not from Greece, I should emphasize, like what Christos Arvanitidis has done some minutes ago, that we have a living history here, Tassos. I think 70%, maybe more, of the marine scientists nowadays in Greece we had the privilege to have this person inspiring us to what we are doing. So this is something very great. But I would like to draw you from the paintings and let's say what we see in the Minoan and the Mycenaeans and so on. I would like to have a comment to draw you back to biology, and what you are doing actually is very, very important, because we speak, and this is a conference about biodiversity, and certain of the creatures you have shown us, like Tonagalea or Charonia tritonis, are now endangered species. So what you are doing gives us, where we are, and this is the section goes to biodiversity. And there's another section also, and I would like to have a comment here, again, on this. Knowing about the creatures who lived there, then, that time, the other section is not biodiversity, the other section is food, and the other section is rational management of resources. Because Aristotle, in the place where I live the last 25 years in the island of Lesbos, he had a school there, Aristotle. He's the father of marine biology. He was saying about some of the very resources. He was speaking about one bivalve, Chlamys glabra. And he was saying, oh, due to overfishing, there is a overexploitation, so vanish. Here we live again a similar situation. In the island of Lesbos, we don't have at all Chlamys glabra, which was one of the resources to understand, because overfishing, no living populations anymore.
I think we do have, Chlamys glabra.
We have, but not the populations we had in the past.
Yeah, the thing is, what's interesting, and I won't say very much because I'll deprive you from your coffee break. You won't like me. The thing is that I said, there's very little difference, very little change, but this is actually is not 100% correct, because quite a lot of the species, which we find, like Chlamys, for example, is much, much smaller, which we used to find, in Minoan times. Not we find, other people found, not us. So from many other points of view. For example, the Argonaut. Argonaut. Was, when I came to Crete, I said, we have to see, if we could catch an Argonaut. Lo and behold, about 2 months later, 3 months later, we got an Argonaut. With an Argonaut alive, from Thermaikos, somewhere there. And people said, well, here you are. I said, yes, let's put them, the whole thing, in a container, to see, because in this case, it was a female who's going, to give birth, to little Argonauts. He died. I said, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I said, we'll find another one. You find one. This was how many years ago? It was 30 years ago. It was like in France, I said Marius, who, funny character, going to Marseille, everybody said to them, if you go to Marseille, go outside, on the port, you'll find 5,000 francs lying, on the street. So he went out, and he looked, down, and here was 5,000, a note of 5,000 marks. He kicked it, said, it doesn't matter, I'll find more. Of course, this is, what I did. We'll find more, We never found, another one. Is it extinct? No one knows. It's very, very difficult, to know some of these things. Well, again, it's coffee break, and I won't deprive you of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now we can go to the coffee break. Then thank you so much. There are going to be still a few other questions, but they will look for you in the coffee break. Thank you so much. It was really amazing.
Don't curse me,
And we'll be back here 4:30 sharp.